All right, everyone. Welcome to the Tonto's Demise Week 2 recap. Another interesting week in the books. If you avoided, if you avoided the injury bug this week, you were one of the lucky ones. A lot of running backs went down. Uh, I think we all feel a little bit bad for FC Bohoric losing Adrian Peterson this week. So in 2 weeks, he's lost his first two draft picks. Um, Although, to be fair, it's hard to be really upset right now, I think, because what was Adrian Peterson doing up until this point when he got injured? Pretty much next to nothing. Yeah, he was your first round draft pick, but I think he got you about 5 points in week 1 and a couple of points here in week 2 before his injury. So, who knows? You might actually be better off, as hard as it and strange as that sounds to say, you might actually be better off without Adrian Peterson. So, we'll just have to wait and see. Bunch of running backs. Let's see who else was hurt. Arian Foster got hurt. Jonathan Stewart got hurt. Doug Martin. I know there was other ones, but I don't have the list right in front of me. But anyway, I don't know. I think Justin was a little bit disappointed that no one noticed or made reference to his changing his team name to FC Durst, which is in reference to Robert Durst and the documentary that was about him on HBO last year. It was called The Jinx. So that is, I guess Justin feels like he is the jinx for his players this year. And I believe he said that DeSean Jackson was his third round draft pick this year. So I assume here in week 3 that his third round draft pick is going to get hurt. Although they've been going in reverse order. So let me take a quick look here at FC Bohoric. So that would mean his fourth round pick would go down this week, and next week would be DeSean Jackson's turn. Let's see. So Michael Floyd, watch out this week. Michael Floyd, you're gonna do something. He is gonna blow out his knee most likely this week. If not DeSean Jackson, it's gonna be Michael Floyd, one of those two. So. All right, enough rambling. Let's get down to the matchups here from week 2. And as usual, we start with the defending champion, which is the Springfield Isotopes, who once again go down in defeat, this time at the hands of New Gods, Mad Titans. I guess I should mention the only team that New Gods, Mad Titans, aka the Raritan Wolves, the only team they beat last year was the Springfield Isotopes, and they do it once again this week here in 2016. And this matchup came all the way down to the end of the Monday night game, where New Gods Mad Titans still had Alshon Jeffrey and the Eagles defense to go, both going up against each other, needing about 44 points from those two to get the win. And New Gods Mad Titans ended up getting, let's see, they needed 44, so they're pretty sure he got about 45. Let's see, almost 15 from Alshon Jeffrey, and the Eagles' defense was, I think, around 30. So it was just enough, and the final score here was 173 even to 171.6. So a 1.4 point margin of victory here for New Gods Mad Titans, who, as we all know, won in week 1 over Disco by a total of 0.15. So Jimmy, New Gods Mad Titans, has managed to get 2 victories by a total of 1.55 points, less than 2 points. So, and on average now, less than 1 point, about 3/4 of a point per victory here. So, yeah, what would that average be? Like 0.75, maybe a little bit 0.76. So let's take a look at the matchup here. I'm sure you're gonna get a laugh by hearing that little sigh that I accidentally slipped there. Wow. All right, we had New Gods Mad Titans versus Springfield Isotopes. Quarterbacks, Rivers versus Manning. Rivers had 43, Manning 51. Pretty close there. Wide receivers, New Gods Mad Titans had Alshon Jeffrey, Marvin Jones, and Doug Baldwin, while the Isotopes had Brandon Cooks, Randall Cobb, and Jarvis Landry. For New Gods Mad Titans, Jeffrey 14.6, Marvin Jones just under 20, and Doug Baldwin in even 5 points. I believe he got hurt sometime during that game also. So this guy, if he actually stayed healthy through that game, this matchup might not have been quite as close. As for the Isotopes, they had just under 14 from Cooks, a little over 9 from Cobb, and about 21.5 from Landry. So that was about 35 points from New Gods receivers, and let's see, 33, 45 points from the Isotopes receivers. Running backs, we had Blunt and West going up against Gordon and Washington. LeGarrette Blunt had, 21.3, and Terrence West 4.2. I was kind of hoping that they would get him maybe a touchdown or two in that revenge game back against Cleveland, but that was not to be. As for Melvin Gordon, he had he had just over 100 yards and a touchdown, so you got about 19 points from him. And Washington had 46 rushing yards, so him and West pretty much canceled each other out there. Tight ends, Reed versus Fleener, 12 for Reed, 5 for Fleener. Flex spots, we had DeMarco Murray versus Mohamed Sanu. Murray had 21.5. Sanu was just under 5. So yeah, going down these lineups here so far, other than Eli Manning outscored Rivers by 8, but the Isotopes outscored New Gods in the receiver spot, slightly beat you in the running back spot, beat you at the tight end spot, beat you at the flex spot, but the biggest impacts were actually the biggest difference maker here was the kicker, as Graham Gano kicked a bunch of field goals and a bunch of PATs as Carolina kind of ran up the score against San Francisco. Looks like Gano had 4 field goals and 4 PATs, while, Boswell from Pittsburgh had 1 field goal and 3 PATs. So the difference there was about 8 to 18. So there's at least a 10-point swing back over in favor of New Gods. While we had the Kansas City Chiefs against the Eagles defense. Like I said, Eagles defense ended up doing about 30, maybe 32, something like that, 31. And Kansas City, I think they had about 17. Even though they lost, they actually did okay. But those were the big difference makers here in a tight matchup. The quarterbacks and the defenses and the kickers. So I guess we like to say the kickers don't really matter, but I guess in this situation they actually did matter. So and New Gods Mad Titans, he stays undefeated, moves all the way up to 3rd place, while the Springfield Isotopes go to 0-2 and dropped to 10th place. Next matchup, we had Week 1's knockout pool loser, Everybody Ertz, going up against Possum Magic, who was just a little bit over 200 in Week 1. And this one, fairly close also. But Everybody Ertz manages to squeak out a victory. The final score here was 147.1 to 140.45. Let's see. Lots of injuries happened in this matchup. Here looks like I see Q's on a lot of people's next to a lot of people's names here going into this coming week. Let's see. Everybody Ertz versus Possum Magic. Let's see. We had Carson Palmer versus Roethlisberger. Palmer wins that one 48.5 to just under 40 for Roethlisberger. Receivers, Ertz had Brandon Marshall, Will Fuller, and Michael Crabtree. Marshall had 16, Fuller had 14.5, and Crabtree had just over 13. So that was, let's see, 44 points there from your receivers. As for Possum Magic, this was a rough one to swallow here for him, as his receiving core was Sammy Watkins, Dante Moncrief, and A.J. Green, who A.J. Green had about 40 points in Week 1. Let's see, Watkins had 4, Moncrief had 2, and A.J. Green had just under 6. So, let's see, 9.8, 10, 11.8. You had under less than 12 points from your 3 receivers. So easily one of the biggest factors swinging this matchup in favor of Everybody Ertz. Running backs, we had Doug Martin and Mark Ingram versus Langford and Crowell. Doug Martin got hurt, only had 23 rushing yards. Ingram only had 30 rushing yards, so only 5 points from Ertz's running backs. Langford, he ran for a touchdown, but he lost a fumble, which pretty much negated his 28 rushing yards. So you got about 6.8 from him. But the big one here was Isaiah Crowell. He had 133 rushing yards, which included an 85-yard touchdown, something like that. So you got a long touchdown bonus from him. So Possum Magic definitely won the running backs. Tight ends, we had Jimmy Graham versus Antonio Gates. Graham got you about 7.5. Antonio Gates, not too much, but he did get a touchdown, so he got 10.5. Flex spot, we had Devontae Freeman going up against Sharp from Tennessee, and Freeman barely won that one, 9.3 to 7.3. Kickers for Ertz, he had Hauschka, who made one 20-yard field goal, and Lambo for Possum kicked a bunch of PATs and one field goal. So this was about 2 to 8, something like that. And your defenses, we had Houston versus Minnesota. Houston did well, limiting Kansas City to only 12 points, had a couple of turnovers. Minnesota did really well too. Several turnovers, a couple sacks. Yahoo says 19 for Ertz and 20 for Minnesota for Possum. It was probably close to like 30, 32, 33, somewhere in that range for each defense here. So, like I said, another really close matchup. Possum's receivers didn't really do too much. I think Moncrief got hurt. Sammy Watkins might be hurt. Thought Brandon Marshall was going to be hurt there. So, going to be interesting to see what you guys can do here for Week 3. How many of those guys are actually going to be able to play. So obviously some of those guys getting hurt affected this matchup. And usually A.J. Green lights up the Steelers. But I don't know what went wrong with him this week. But Everybody Ertz will take the win. And he moves to 9th place, while Possum Magic drops to 5th. All right, the next matchup we had the Dub C Hooligans going up against From Gags to Riches, the Pony Boy, and Dub C Hooligans. Despite some really bad performances from several guys, managed to squeak this one out. It was good enough to take down From Gags to Riches, who had several poor performances from a lot of his guys too. Final score here was Dub C 157.85 to Gags to Riches 143.35. So a 14-point margin of victory here. Let's see. Here we had Drew Brees versus Andrew Luck. Drew Brees kind of had a quiet game. Even though he did complete 29 passes, he was still under 300 yards and only had one touchdown, which was kind of strange because if you remember this matchup last year, the Saints and the Giants had over 100 points scored in that game, and I believe that was the week where Drew Brees, it had to have been the week where he set the Tonto's Demise single week record, and I believe he scored 95 points all by himself that week last year. I think he was for FC Bahoric. I can't remember for sure, but a far cry from those gaudy numbers from last year. But said Brees, just over 46 points. But it was a lot better than Andrew Luck fared against the Denver defense. He ended up under 200 yards passing and only one touchdown. He had just over 32 points. The receivers, we had Dub C with Julio Jones, Golden Tate, and Allen Hurns. Julio, 21.5. Tate, 3.3. Not too good there. Allen Hurns, 11.4. So you got about 36 or so from your receivers. Gags to Riches, his receivers are Odell Beckham Jr., Emmanuel Sanders, and he actually started Travis Benjamin over Dez Bryant this week, which ended up being a pretty good decision here because Travis Benjamin scored just under 30 points all by himself. Beckham 16.5, Sanders 7. So you got 30, 45, 46, about 52, 53 points from your wide receivers. A little bit better than Dub C. As for your running backs, we had Lamar Miller and Forsett for Dub C going against Gurley and Hyde for Gags to Riches. Let's see, Lamar Miller had 83 rushing yards, so 8.3. Forsett, 3.7 from him. Gurley, 5 points. And Carlos Hyde, actually, it looks like he lost a fumble, so he only got you 1.4. So Dub C got about 12 points from his running backs, and Gags, you got about 6 from your two running backs total. Let's see. Tight ends, we had Barnidge versus Kelsey. Barnidge actually showed up this week, caught a couple passes. Let's see, but 7.7 points from him. Kelsey, just a little bit more than that, 8.4. Your flex players, Danny Woodhead versus LaShawn McCoy. As we know, Danny Woodhead, I believe, tore his ACL. He is done for the year pretty early on in that game. He only got you 4 points before going out. LaShawn McCoy, 13 points. Let's see, kickers, Walsh versus Gostowski. Each one made a couple PATs. Looks like kicked one field goal each. Yahoo has them both at 6. They were probably both. That's probably where they were at. Maybe closer to 7 if you count the fractional points from the field goals. Defenses here. This was the big difference maker in this matchup because I believe we already totaled it up earlier. Arizona. I think they had 5 turnovers. They scored a touchdown. Didn't give up very many points. Their total, Arizona's defense gave up. Let's see. I think they scored. I think it was 45 points this week. So probably the best week you're going to get from their defense this year. 45, pretty good. I mean, well, it's great. It's a great score from our defense. You're probably, like I said, 45 is, if you touch that number again this year, it'll probably be surprising, but that's as good as you can possibly get or hope for from a defense. As for New England, actually they did pretty good. They had a handful of turnovers, but they jumped up to a big lead. Then Garoppolo got hurt. Miami started to make a comeback. Actually, got within a touchdown. I think they nearly tied it up at the end of the game, but so you got those turnovers. They won the game, but they ended up giving up a lot of yards and a lot of points here. So even though Yahoo says 15, it was probably closer to 20, 25, something like that. But not 40. It said 45 from Arizona's D. Great score for that. Combined with said Breeze, so there's 90 points right there. So when you get 90, so if you get 90 points out of your quarterback and your defense, you're well on your way, at least you hopefully, to getting a victory. And so it was a tough one this week for Gags to Riches with his quarterbacks that only scored 32. Some pretty low scores from his running backs and not much production from Sanders or Kelsey or well, even as a kind of off game for Gostowski, I think only 6 points is kind of low for him. I think he did miss a field goal, which he doesn't usually do. But anyway, Dub C takes this one down. He moves to 1-1. He's now in 7th place. While Gags to Riches, he drops to 0-2, and he is now all the way down in 11th place. Next matchup, we had Huber Squashers going against FC Bohoric. And I think we already know how this one went, as Huber Squashers took it down pretty easily. Final score here was 197.1 to 160.45. So a 37-point margin of victory. One of the biggest margins here this week. Let's see. Quarterbacks, we had Matt Ryan versus Kirk Cousins. Great matchup here. Ryan just under 60, while Cousins just a little bit over 50, 52 to 59.8, something like that. So good one there. Receivers for Huber Squashers, he had Amari Cooper, Jordy Nelson, and Willie Snead. Cooper with 12, Nelson with 18, and Snead with 16 and a half. So that's about 46, 47 points. From your receivers, Bohoric, he had Michael Floyd, Deshaun Jackson, and Mike Wallace. Floyd, 8.8, Jackson, 7, Mike Wallace, 20.1. So about 35 points, 36 points from his receivers. Running backs, Adrian Peterson and Rashad Jennings for FC Bohoric against Jonathan Stewart and Matt Jones for Huber Squashers. Peterson had 20 yards before he went out, and Jennings had 27 yards before he went out. So you got less than 5 points from your two running backs. Huber Squashers, let's see. Jonathan Stewart actually did get hurt in this game too. He only had 9 yards, and Matt Jones did score a touchdown and had 60 yards. So you actually got 12 points there, giving you about 13 from your two running backs. Tight ends, we had Greg Olsen versus Dwayne Allen. Allen only had 2 for 25, while Greg Olsen crushed that pretty much on one play. I think he had a 75-yard touchdown, which is unusual for a tight end. You don't usually see that too often, but so he had 23.2, which jumped up to 26.2 with his long touchdown bonus. So easily defeating Dwayne Allen there. Let's see. Flex players, we had C.J. Anderson against Giovanni Bernard. Actually, pretty good games from both of these guys. They both scored. Let's see, Anderson just over 18, while Gio Bernard was actually almost at 25 points. He actually had 100 receiving yards. He had 9 catches and a touchdown. Did most of his damage there in the receiving game, as Cincinnati was down about, was it like 24-3, something like that, against Pittsburgh here, and had to try and make a comeback near the end of the game. And Giovanni Bernard caught a lot of screen passes, padded his stats here, which is exactly what you're hoping for when you play somebody like Gio Bernard, and especially in your flex spot. That's pretty much the dream game that you're going to get from him. He's had 9 catches, 100 yards, and a touchdown, which there's pretty much all of his points. I'm not sure if he even had any rushing stats in this game, because that would be, said 100 yards receiving, so yeah, 19 and 6 would be 25, but he actually had less than he scored less than 25. So did he actually have negative yards rushing or something? I gotta take a look at the box score here just to see because I find that quite a little bit strange. Oh, he had 17 yards rushing, but he lost a fumble, so that's why his score was actually a little bit less than what he totaled with receiving there. But like I said, he took that one 24.7 to 18.3. Kickers, we had McManus versus Tucker. Both of these guys did pretty good. Yahoo says 13 for McManus, 15 for Tucker. A couple field goals from each one. So usually, whenever Yahoo is usually pretty close, but they don't count in the fractional points. So like I said, you see McManus has 13 on Yahoo. It's probably closer to 14 and a half, depending on the fractions. Pretty much anytime you see a kicker's point totals, what Yahoo says, you can usually bump it up like a point, between half of a point and a point and a half, somewhere in that ballpark, thanks to the fractional points for the field goals. Anyway, defenses. Both defenses did pretty good again here. Baltimore, FC Bohoric picked up Baltimore's defense last week, plugged and played them. They actually did pretty good. Well, they were going against Cleveland, had a couple of turnovers, didn't give up too many points. They actually did block a kick and returned it. It was an extra point attempt, so they actually got 2 points for returning that block kick all the way back to the end zone, which I think became a new rule last year. But as far as I can remember, I think this is the first time that it's actually happened where a blocked extra point was run back for not a touchdown, but 2 points. So Baltimore's defense, I don't think Yahoo had that in there, and so I had to tack those extra 2 points on. So one thing we'll have to watch for in the future, in case I don't notice that happens. I usually keep pretty good eye on the box scores and see what's going on, but in the future, if I ever miss something like that, which is always a possibility, if that's your defense, always feel free to chime in and just make sure that that didn't go missed. As for the Seattle defense, they only gave up 9 points, had a couple sacks, but they lost 9-3 to the LA Rams. Yahoo says 9. I think it was actually about 15 or 16. So Baltimore did outscored you here. But a lot of those big performances from Bernard, Olsen, a good production from your receiving core, and said Matt Jones pretty much outscored all the other running backs just by himself, since he didn't get hurt and scored a touchdown. So Huber Squashers wins. He jumps to first place, 2-0. FC Bohoric, he is now in 8th place at 1-1. Moves up to first place knocking back the Detonators, who are in the next matchup, who I guess it's only fitting that the Detonators this week went up against the highest scoring team in week 2, which was the Mighty Midgets. Mighty Midgets' score was 204.95 to the Detonators' 182.1. Real quick before I get into this matchup, I just want to say, so now we have first place being swapped out between the podcast, flip-flopped here between the podcasters here. So hopefully there's no tension in the room whenever next time they get together and record a show. Well, I guess that won't be for at least another week yet, so there might be a change in the standings here between now and then, but so after 2 weeks, we actually have Huber Squashers, I was going to say, averaging 190 points, which is ridiculous. And it would give you, if Huber Squashers, not to dismiss your production here in these early weeks, you've done well, but averaging 190 is an unsustainable number, I think, because let's see, 190, if you sustain that pace for the entire year, at the end of the regular season, you would end up with, I believe, just under 2,500 points, which would crush any previous record, because I believe in previous studies my own previous studies of past years, I can tell you, because I have it written down offhand, that last year, because the Isotopes last year had the highest point total in the regular season, and that was at 2220. So actually, I was looking back to see what my season point totals were for the past few years, in the last 5 years, because those are pretty much the only score, the years that you can find that are accurate. But like in 2011, we scored 2320. That was the most of anybody in the regular season. And then 2012, 2200, 2013, 2289, 2014, 2171, and then last year, 2220, which was from 2011, was the highest. That was the highest point total. Then second highest, then highest. 2014 was the fourth highest, and then last year was the highest. So you're gonna get about 2,200 points, right in somewhere in that ballpark is usually gonna be the highest point total for regular season point total from anybody. So like I said, if you can maintain this pace, you will crush that by about 200 points. So hey, anything could happen. Good luck to you with that, but enjoy it now. Said I'm not dismissing the quality of your team's performances so far this year. Actually, a couple people are just not too far back from you here at that average point total, but I'm pretty sure historically, at least, maybe I notice it more because I usually am the one who figures out all the numbers here for every team and stuff. But for at least for the past few years, I think that the first couple weeks of the season are when we tend to get a lot of the really high scores across the board, from pretty much every team, which is no different than what I've been seeing. We've seen already this year, where I mean, Twerkin only had 128 this week, but 140 was the lowest. Everybody was, we had 170s, 180s, 190s, and 200s here. Even back in week 1, 2 people were over 200. The lowest score for the knockout pool last week was 142, which was that would not have gotten you knocked out this week here in week too. But yeah, last week we had 150s, 170s, 180s, the 200s. So it's been a fairly high scoring year so far. Just pointing out that that has been the trend for the past couple years, but the trend has also been that those crazy, really high point totals have been unsustainable throughout over the course of the full season. So I could be wrong. You might buck the trend, but I believe that's what I've noticed here over the last couple years. That, and it's happened again this year. Like I said, that the first couple weeks of the season are when the scores across the board tend to be a lot higher than they are once you get to a little bit later in the season. Anyway, said Mighty Midgets 204.5 to Detonators 182.1. So about a 22-point margin of victory here. We had Rogers versus Stafford. They both scored right about 39. Let's see. Midgets wide receivers. He had Allen Robinson, Demaryius Thomas, and Corey Coleman. Let's see. Robinson 8.4, Thomas 16, and Coleman 27.4. He had 2 touchdowns and 100 yards. So that gives you, let's see, 24 and 27 is 51. So about 52 points from Midgets' 3 receivers. Detonators, your 3 receivers, Mike Evans, Larry Fitzgerald, Kelvin Benjamin. Evans, 19. Fitzgerald, 20. Benjamin, 29.8. So just under 30 there. Another great performance from his receiving core. Let's see, 30 and 30, so just under 60 from Detonators' 3 receivers. Pretty good game, so about 20 points from each one. Well, more than that on average, because, right, 40, actually, no, 70 point, I'm sorry. He had just under 70 from his 3 receivers. Matty Midgets, running backs, he had Latavius Murray and Matt Forte going against Ryan Matthews and Amir Abdullah. Murray, he had a touchdown and 57 rushing yards, so that was about 11.7. Well, as we know from the Thursday night game, Forte, exactly 100 yards to get that 3-point bonus, and he had 3 rushing touchdowns. So I think it was 31 points from him and 12 from Murray. So you got about 43 points from your running backs. Definitely a good score there. As for Detonators, his running backs, Ryan Matthews, he only had 32 rushing yards, but he did score 2 touchdowns, so that got you about 15. And as for Abdullah, he had 38 yards before he went down with an injury. So, Detonators, you got about 15 and 4, 19 points from your running backs. Tight ends, we had Delanie Walker going against Uzomah from Cincinnati, because Gronkowski was out once again. Delanie Walker, 20.3 to 4 points for Uzomah. He had 3 catches, but only 9 yards. Flex spots, pretty good matchup here. David Johnson versus D'Angelo Williams. Johnson actually had 98 receiving yards, on 3 catches. Probably what you'd like to see. I think he had 1 really long reception, obviously, but you'd like to see maybe a few more receptions come from 98 yards receiving. Let's see, D'Angelo Williams, he had 94 rushing yards, and he scored a receiving touchdown. He had a couple receptions. He did 23.2, so pretty good matchup there. 17 to 23, pretty good. Bailey versus Janikowski. Bailey, let's see, he had a couple field goals, a couple PATs. He had 8 on Yahoo. Janikowski had 1. Let's see, he missed a field goal, and he had a couple PATs, so he only got you 3. As for defenses, Carolina, they did pretty well. They scored a touchdown, had a couple turnovers, but I think in garbage time they ended up giving up a lot of points and yards. So Yahoo says 20. I think it was a little bit more than that. As for Pittsburgh, they also did pretty well, had a couple turnovers and a sack, but they gave up a lot of yards, especially as passing yards, as Cincinnati again was trying to make a big comeback here. Yahoo says 13. I think it was closer to like 20. So, yeah, actually pretty good matchup here. Good performances from each team. I think Detonators, you'll take 182 points from your team any time, any week of the year. But it wasn't quite enough. As I said, Mighty Midgets had the highest score of the week. And he moves to 2-0. He is up to second place, while the Detonators drop from first to fourth. They are 1-1. And the final matchup here was Disco versus the Twerkin Bullcuts. Disco took this one down. The final score was 183.95 to only 128.65, which means Twerkin was the victim here in week 2 from the knockout pool. Let's see, quarterbacks. We had Cam versus Bortles. Cam had a long touchdown, so he was about 62 to Bortles 54. Pretty good scores from both there. Disco's receivers, Hopkins, Matthews, and Decker. 24.3 for Hopkins, 13 for Matthews, and 24.5 for Decker. So that's about 62 somewhere right for your 3 receivers. Pretty good total. For Twerkin, he had Macklin, Edelman, and Antonio Brown. Surprisingly low score for Antonio Brown. Let's see. Macklin 12.8, Edelman 14.6, and Brown just below 8. So it looks like you got about 35 points from your 3 receivers. Running backs we had for Disco, Elliott, and Lacey. They combined for, let's see. Elliott had 83 yards and a touchdown, but he lost a fumble, so that's about 12 points. Lacey had 50 yards, so 5. You got 17 from your running backs. Let's see. Gore and Rawls. Rawls got hurt. He actually had -7 rushing yards, so he actually scored you negative points this week. While Frank Gore, he only had 44 rushing yards, but he did score a receiving touchdown. So that got you back up to about 10 points from your running backs. Tight ends, we had Zach Miller versus Ebron. Ebron wins that just slightly, I should say. 9.3 to 7.3. Flex players, you had Spencer Ware for Twerkin versus TJ Yeldon for Disco. 10.5 for Ware and 11.8 for Yeldon, who actually he had 8 catches. I don't know. I'm just really noticing this now, how this is possible. That TJ Yeldon had 8 receptions, but only 10 receiving yards? That seems really strange to me. But that's what happened here. Spencer Ware, a quiet game from him after really blowing up on the receiving end last week. So yeah, 10.5 to 11.5, pretty close matchup there, but in a good one. A little bit disappointing, I think, from the owners there. Kickers, Crosby for Twerkin only had 2 PATs, while Catanzaro for Disco had 4 PATs and 2 field goals. About 10 points there. Bengals defense lost to the Steelers, had a couple turnovers, did okay. Yahoo says 10. It was right around there. While Jets defense, they won the game, but only had 1 turnover, gave up a ton of yards and points. Let's see, Yahoo says 6. I believe the total was actually like 12. So, I think it was definitely the receiver core here that swung this one in favor of Disco. Disco moves to 1-1. He is in 6th place, while Twerkin drops to 0-2, and he is now in 12th place. All right, well, those were the matchups for week 2. as we know, there's going to be no podcast this week because Detling decided to take a vacation to go see his and Bigler's Superman, Cam Newton, this weekend. So I guess that's more important than your podcast duties. I mean, couldn't you have recorded it before? Like, yeah, it's not like the matchups for week 3 weren't available, quite a while ago before you went on your trip. You could have taken a look at at least the potential starting lineups. But anyway, I mean, I said there might not be a podcast. Who knows? Maybe there will. Maybe somebody or multiple people will step up to the plate and make a few phone calls, get in there, give Brian something he can piece together into what I guess we could call a week 3 podcast. But just taking a quick look at the matchups here coming up this week. We got some good ones. We have the two 2-0 teams, well, two of the 2-0 teams, New Gods Mad Titans versus Mighty Midgets. Only one team can go 3-0. It's looking like Mighty Midgets is going to have a full roster all set to go here, while New Gods Mad Titans, is he going to have Doug Baldwin or not? Who knows? How are the Steelers going to do against the Eagles defense? Who knows? And is he going to play the right receiver combination, since he's got a bunch of guys? He had a shuffle here around. I think he had Torrey Smith in week 1 and didn't do too much, so he plugged in Sanu, who ended up not doing too much in week 2. So it's going to be interesting for him, trying to make decisions from week to week here. Also, his tight end core so far leaves a lot to be desired, with so far Coby Fleener and Richard Rodgers. Let's see. Sorry, I'm just taking a look at the matchups here. Yeah, so that's going to be a good one. As again, the last thing I wanted to mention was that New Mad Titans just has to get through this week, and then he will have Le'Veon Bell back. And who knows? He picked up Marshawn Lynch. Said it might be a couple weeks yet till we know whether or not that was a good move or just a waste of time. We'll have to see. Let's see. Pretty much so we had two 2-0 teams going up against each other, and we've got two 0-2 teams with the Isotopes and Twerkin going against each other. So only one of those teams can go 3-0, and only one of those teams can go 0-3. So we'll have to see which one it is. Really, either one who goes to 0-3 is going to be in a tough spot because, as we know, the magic number is 7. If you get to 7 losses, you are pretty much out of it. Not totally, but you're treading thin ice there, as we know. So, hoping to avoid the 0-3 start, and someone's going to get the 3-0. Will Huber Squashers get the 3-0 also? I don't know. They've got a tough matchup against Possum Magic, who has been doing pretty well so far. Said Jonathan Stewart looks like he's going to be out. So Huber Squashers going to have to figure out who he's going to plug in. Is he going to start? Said he really doesn't. I mean, is Jamal Charles going to go? Is he worth the risk yet? Are you going to put in Charkandrick or Alfred Morris? That's pretty much all you've got. Said I think you don't want to move Bernard from the flex spot unless you really have to. So it's going to be a tough call for Huber Squashers here on what he's going to do with his lineup. Let's see. As for Possum Magic, I don't think he's not affected by injuries too much, other than maybe Sammy Watkins. Have to wait and see what he's gonna do. Moncrief, he's got a Q by his name too. So a lot of people are questionable, and who knows what's gonna happen. That's got to be I think, the most frustrating thing, definitely for me and probably for everybody else, is this whole elimination of the probable tag where everybody is either questionable or they are out, which, I mean, as far as it's always been, questionable means like 50-50 chance. So you really have to pay attention all the way up, pretty much up until game time for these guys now. So that's definitely annoying. What other matchups do we have? We got Disco versus Ertz. We've got Dub C versus FC Bahorik, or he's now FC Durst, and Gags versus the Detonators. Gags is looking to avoid going 0-3 up against the Detonators this week. He's actually a heavy favorite right now. Gags is, as I see the projections have him at, let's see, about 170 to the Detonators 156. Detonators actually making a bold move, plugging in Ryan Tannehill going against the Cleveland Browns. I guess you're hoping for good things while Stafford is at Green Bay. Both of those matchups could be pretty good. Going to be some interesting plays here this week. I have to wait and see. Will Gronk come back? That could affect a lot of things. Will Abdullah be out? I think it's pretty likely there. So, Gags looks like he's already made a couple changes to his starting lineup from last week, as Sanders is now on the bench. Dez Bryant is back in. Excuse me. Looks like he's got McCoy to the bench, and he's got Theo Riddick in the flex spot. Could be an interesting move there. I'll have to wait and see what happens. So yeah, there's going to be some pretty interesting matchups here this week. If you take a look at the standings, I think I might say this every season, but here we are after week 2, and if you got a little bit of OCD in you, you're gonna love it, because we have the 12 teams. We have 12 teams, but we've got 6 teams that are exactly 1-1. So 3 teams are 2-0, and 3 teams are 0-2. So you've got the nice 3 on top, 6 in the middle, 3 on the bottom there. So I find it interesting to look at when I'm looking at the Yahoo page. Which, does anybody even actually look at the Yahoo page anymore, or does everybody just use their apps, and between the Yahoo Fantasy app and the Line app to get all your information here? Because I know that people have questioned before, with like changing things with or did I actually shuffle the schedule 11 times or whatever it was. But if you go on the Yahoo page under the commish updates, everything I do or Jimmy does is listed there for you to see. So if there's any questions on the things that I do, it's all right there. So, is there anything else that I missed? The knockout pool, I think I mentioned, was Twerkin this week. So everybody, Ertz and Twerkin, are now eliminated. And I think that's pretty much it. So this week should be interesting. Said one team is going to go to 3-0, one team is going to go to 0-3. Everybody else will further jumble up the middle, and we'll have to wait and see what happens. So a lot of good matchups. A lot of people having to make some changes here due to injuries or inefficiency. So we'll have to see what happens. Yeah, good matchups. So look forward to seeing whether or not Brian pieces anything together from phone calls or whatever anybody does. But all right, we'll see you back here again next week for the Week 3 review. All right, see you guys next week, and good luck to everybody. See you then.